Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. Today we're diving deep into something that might sound a bit dry, maybe bureaucratic even, but it actually has this surprising power over your daily life, your taxes, the whole works. Here's a thought to get us started. What if all that money spent on social programs, healthcare, education, what if it isn't just an expense like we often think? What if it's actually a crucial investment, one that benefits you directly, maybe in ways you haven't really considered?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to put it, and it gets right to the heart of what we're exploring today. We're sort of pulling back the curtain on social sector expenditure, which is, basically how governments fund things like healthcare, education, pensions, all that stuff.
Right. And our mission today is to unpack the intricate connection between this spending and tax policy. It's often surprising, actually. And we want to show why understanding this relationship is just so essential for everyone, especially now, navigating this post-pandemic world in July 2025. Our insights today, they come from a pretty unique source, an expert presentation given at India's National Academy of Direct Taxes. So a really specific viewpoint.
Exactly. And as we dig into this, it's helpful to keep some core ideas in mind, like the social contract theory, that sort of unwritten agreement between us, the citizens, and the state.
The give and take.
Precisely. You contribute, the state provides security, services, that kind of thing, and also how this spending affects institutional trust. Your actual confidence in government. Does it work? Do you trust it?
Okay, so we're framing this as an investment. But what exactly is this social spending we're investing in? Because it sounds like the definition itself isn't totally straightforward.
That's a great point. It really isn't. Different global bodies, they actually see it quite differently. Take the World Bank, for instance. Their Aspire definition, it frames social protection mostly as risk management.
Risk management, like insurance.
Kind of, yeah. Like the government acting as an insurer, helping you manage life's bumps in the road. But then you have the OECD. They put more emphasis on redistribution, using social spending to tackle inequalities that the market might create.
So different philosophies behind the definitions.
Fundamentally different, yeah. They reflect different ideas about what the government's role should even be.
And it's more than just a basic safety net, isn't it? I've heard about this concept of a social protection floor.
Exactly. That comes largely from ILO research, the International Labor Organization. It shows how good social protection often involves layers. Think of it like a solid foundation, maybe a green foundation of basic guarantees for everyone.
Like
things like basic health care, access to education, some income security for kids, the elderly, people with disabilities. These are sometimes called social citizenship rights.
Okay, basic entitlements.
Right. And then above that foundation, protection can increase, maybe linked to your income or contributions. This layered approach, it creates what economists call positive externalities.
Positive externality.
Yeah.
So spillover benefits. You're saying this spending isn't just a cost. It can actually, boost the economy. How does that work?
That's exactly it. That's the core idea.
Yeah.
When people have that basic security, when they aren't constantly worried about, putting food on the table or getting sick, they're much more likely to take risks, like starting a business.
Oh, yeah.
Or investing in their education, moving for a better job. It's not just welfare in the old sense. It's about enabling growth, enabling people to participate fully.
So for tax officials, this is interesting.
It's crucial. It means social spending isn't just money out the door. It acts as an automatic stabilizer in downturns, right?
Yeah.
It kicks in, provides stimulus.
Helping to smooth things out.
Exactly. And it's also a growth enabler because it builds human capital. Healthier, better educated people.
And the scale of this.
Oh, it's huge. The OECD average is around 21.1% of GDP. Just to give you a sense, for India, that would be roughly 50 lakh crores a year.
Wow. That's staggering. But okay, here's where it gets even more interesting, I think. This iceberg problem. That huge number, the direct spending, it's often just what we see above the water, right? There's this whole hidden welfare state underneath.
This is such a critical point, especially when you're thinking about tax policy. We're talking about tax expenditures.
Tax expenditures, explain that.
It's basically government spending that happens through the tax system. Think tax breaks, credits, deductions, maybe lower tax rates for certain things, all designed to achieve social goals, just like direct spending.
So instead of the government writing a check, they're just not collecting the tax they otherwise would.
Exactly. It achieves a similar outcome, but it's often much less visible, much less scrutinized in the budget process.
And these aren't small amounts.
Not at all. They can easily be 2–4% of GDP. That's comparable to, like, the entire budget for some government ministries.
Wow. Okay. And where does this hidden spending tend to go?
Well, if you look at societal priorities reflected in all social spending, direct and hidden, old age spending often dominates. Pensions, healthcare for seniors. This reflects the demographic transition, falling birth rates, people living longer. It's often framed as a pension burden.
But it's more complex.
It is. Older populations also represent a huge amount of accumulated human capital experience.
Yeah.
And they're consumers, too, driving demand.
Right. What about healthcare overall?
Healthcare spending varies a lot. Countries with single-payer systems, like the UK's NHS, might have high public spending, but often their total healthcare costs are lower than mixed systems like the US.
Why is that?
It points to this administrative efficiency effect. Universal systems can sometimes be less complex, less fragmented.
And policies supporting families, childcare, things like that.
Yeah, that relates to something called defamilialization. Policies that reduce the unpaid care work that historically often fell on women. Where you see higher spending there, you often see higher female labor force participation. That can create a big economic boost, a demographic dividend.
So the big takeaway here is transparency.
Absolutely. For anyone wanting the full picture, you need integrated reporting systems. Systems that capture both the direct spending and these hidden tax expenditures. That's the only way to get real accountability.
Okay, so this complex system didn't just spring up fully formed. The history here is really the history of the modern state, isn't it? This great transformation idea.
It really is Karl Polanyi's idea. He talked about how, especially during industrialization, societies had to create new institutions, ways to protect people from the sometimes harsh realities of market forces. Back in the early days, say 1880 to 1945, social spending was tiny, less than 5% of GDP.
Why so low?
Because traditional support systems, family, community were stronger. But industrialization, urbanization, they weakened those ties. So governments slowly, gradually started stepping in for stability, really, both political and economic.
Then came the post-war boom, the golden age.
Right. Roughly 1960 to 1980. That's when social spending really took off. It basically doubled across the OECD, from about 7.9% to 17.9% of GDP.
What drove that?
Economic growth gave governments the money, the fiscal space, and, frankly, political competition. Parties competed to offer better social programs. But you see different paths. France, Sweden, they shot way up, maybe 32% of GDP. Germany was more gradual. The U.S. stayed much lower.
Why the difference?
It shows path dependence. Early choices kind of lock countries into certain trajectories. It's hard to suddenly change course.
And more recently, leading up to, say, COVID.
Well, from about 2000 to 2019, the growth slowed down a bit. There were efforts towards fiscal consolidation, budget balancing, plus ongoing demographic pressures.
And then COVID hit.
Yeah. Massive focusing event. It triggered the biggest peacetime expansion of social protection ever recorded. OECD spending jumped from around 20% to 23% of GDP almost overnight.
Did it go back down afterwards?
Not entirely. That's the interesting thing. It created a ratchet effect. Spending generally stayed higher than it was before the pandemic.
So the big lesson from history is
that social spending isn't some temporary add-on. It's become a structural feature of modern economies. It's baked in. And our tax systems, well, they just have to be designed for that reality.
a structural feature. Okay.
Yeah.
That leads nicely into how different countries actually structure these systems.
Mm.
Esping Anderson's work on different welfare state models seems key here.
Yeah, his typology is really useful. It helps understand the different ways countries try to solve the welfare state trilemma,
Which is?
balancing three tricky things: economic efficiency, social equality, and political feasibility. Getting all three right is tough, so you get different models. Like the continental European one, think France, maybe Germany. France is spending around 31.6% of GDP.
What's their focus?
It often emphasizes status maintenance. Using social insurance linked to your job to maintain your living standard if you lose work or retire. It reflects older Bismarckian traditions, strong protection, but maybe sometimes less flexible labor markets.
Okay. Then there's the Nordic model, often held up as ideal.
Right. Countries like Finland at 29%, Norway maybe a bit lower at 20.7%. They exemplify social democratic corporatism. They manage to achieve high levels of both efficiency and equality. Lots of universal programs, strong collaboration between government, unions, employers. Their success really challenges some standard economic ideas about trade-offs.
On the Anglo-Saxon model, the U.S., UK.
Yeah, the U.S. at around 22.7%, UK 22.1%. This model tends to focus more on targeting benefits to the poorest, more reliance on means testing. And it encourages private provision, private pensions, private health insurance. It reflects more of a residual welfare philosophy. The state steps in as a last resort.
What about emerging economies? They face different issues, right?
Absolutely. Countries like Mexico, spending maybe 7.4%, they face this premature welfare state challenge.
Premature.
Meaning they're getting older demographically, more elderly people, before they've fully developed economically. So they have to design systems with much tighter budgets, fewer resources.
So the implication for you listening is, understanding your country's model tells you a lot.
Definitely. Each model means different tax structures, different ways costs are shared. It helps you see the fundamental choices your society has made and how it stacks up globally.
Let's zoom in on one specific area, healthcare. Because that seems like a huge challenge everywhere. You hear called a superior good.
It is. Basically, as societies get richer, demand for healthcare goes up even faster than income. People want more and better care. Plus, you have the cost disease. Healthcare costs tend to rise faster than general inflation, new tech, aging populations. It all pushes costs up.
And the U.S. is a particular case here, isn't it? The American healthcare paradox.
It really is. The U.S. spends vastly more than any other country, a huge chunk through private spending.
But the outcomes aren't necessarily better.
Exactly. Often comparable, sometimes worse than countries spending much less. Why? Immense administrative complexity, market failures, fragmented system.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
So pouring money in isn't the answer.
Not necessarily how much, but how it's spent. Look at Germany or France. They use social insurance systems effectively. They manage to control total costs partly through monopsony power.
Monopsony, meaning one big buyer.
Essentially, yeah. A large national or regional system can negotiate much better prices for drugs, for services, than lots of small competing insurers can. But the overall trend, aging, tech, expectations, it creates this healthcare fiscal gap for almost everyone. Governments are struggling to keep up.
Okay, but here's a twist you mentioned. Countries spending more publicly on healthcare often have lower total costs. That seems backwards.
It does. It's counterintuitive, but the data often shows it. It really challenges the assumption that government provision is always less efficient than private markets, especially in healthcare.
So what for you, the listener?
Is that how healthcare is financed really matters? Broad-based public funding, whether through taxes or social insurance, can often deliver better outcomes and better cost control than highly fragmented private systems. It's a major policy choice with huge consequences.
This really flips some common assumptions on their head, like the idea that generous welfare states just kill economic growth. But Peter Lindert's research you mentioned found basically zero net cost, no Darwinian mechanism punishing these countries. How is that possible when they spend, 25, 30% of GDP on this?
Yeah, that's the fascinating welfare state paradox. It works through several channels. It's not just a safety net. It's actually designed in many ways to support the economy. First, automatic stabilizers. We touched on this.
Right, unemployment benefits kicking in during recessions.
Exactly. They cushion the blow, pump money into the economy right when it's needed, reduce volatility. It prevents deeper downturns.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Second, powerful supply-side effects.
Yeah.
Think about universal healthcare and education. They create human capital.
Healthier, more skilled workers.
Precisely. And unemployment benefits. They're often criticized as disincentives, but they can actually lead to better job matching. People don't have to grab the first terrible job offer. They can take a bit of time to find a role that really fits their skills, that boosts overall productivity.
Didn't think of it that way.
And third, and this is really interesting, it can encourage entrepreneurship.
How so? Seems like the opposite would be true.
Well, think about it. If you know you won't lose your family's health insurance if you quit your job to start a business, or if you know there's some basic income support if your startup fails, you're much more willing to take that risk.
Reduces the downside.
Exactly. And you see this in Nordic countries. High social spending, but also really high rates of business creation and innovation.
That's a crucial point that gets lost, I think.
It absolutely does. And conversely, look at countries with really low social spending, maybe 10–15% of GDP. Their economic growth rates are often much more volatile, much more boom and bust.
So minimal safety nets might actually increase instability.
The evidence kind of points that way. So, the bottom line for you. Robust social spending doesn't automatically wreck the economy. The real challenge is designing tax systems smartly minimizing the distortions, while still raising enough revenue for these vital investments.
Which leads us perfectly to the tax policy nexus. Because tax and social spending aren't really separate worlds, are they? They're totally intertwined.
Deeply intertwined. And coordinating them is the policy integration challenge. You're constantly trying to balance multiple goals. Raising enough money, yes, but also economic efficiency, fairness or equity, administrative feasibility, and political reality.
And there are tensions there, right? Like efficiency versus equity.
Always. That's the classic efficiency-equity trade-off. Policies that boost growth might increase inequality and vice versa. Plus, you often have bureaucratic silos. The tax agency does its thing, the social welfare ministry does its thing, and they don't always talk effectively.
Preventing a joined-up approach.
Exactly, and the relationship goes both ways. Tax policy obviously sets the budget, the fiscal space, for social programs. But the design of social programs feeds back into the tax system. Think about it. Generous unemployment benefits might affect work incentives, which in turn affects the tax base.
If fewer people are working, fewer are paying income tax.
Right. So the core message, you need really close collaboration. Tax agencies and social spending agencies have to be on the same page.
Okay, so collaboration is key.
Mm.
How do countries actually pay for all this social spending beyond just general income tax?
There's a real mix of funding sources. General taxation is one major way, I think the UK's NHS, funded from the overall government budget.
What are the pros and cons there?
Pro, it's usually progressive, stable revenue, supports universal coverage.
That's
Con,
right.
social programs become vulnerable to general budget cuts if the government needs to tighten its belt. Then you have social insurance contributions, like in Germany. Specific payroll taxes, often earmarked for health, pensions, unemployment.
Like FICA in the U.S.
Similar idea, yeah. It's earmarked taxation. Creates strong buy-in, people feel they're paying for their benefits, but it can increase labor costs, the tax wedge between what an employer pays and what the worker takes home.
Okay. And then there's our hidden friend, tax expenditures.
Right back to them. Things like the U.S. Earned Income Tax Credit. It's effectively welfare delivered via the tax code, social policy, but administered by the tax authorities, often with less visibility.
You called it a quiet revolution.
It kind of is. And finally, you have public-private partnerships, things like tax incentives to encourage people to save in private pension plans, shared responsibility, but sometimes they can be more expensive overall or leave gaps in coverage.
That's a fascinating menu of options. Let's dive even deeper into those tax expenditures because the scale sounds enormous and they operate in this submerged state.
It's so important to grasp this. Again, we're talking 2–4% of GDP in many countries managed by tax officials, but often escaping the spotlight. Where does the money go? Well, housing and mortgage benefits are often huge. Tax deductions for mortgage interest, for example.
But those mainly benefit homeowners, right? Maybe wealthier ones.
Often, yes. They can be regressive. The biggest benefits go to those with the biggest mortgages, typically higher earners. So it raises equity questions. Retirement savings incentives are another big area. Tax breaks for contributing to pensions or retirement accounts.
Designed to encourage saving. Does it work?
Sometimes, but there's a risk of deadweight loss. That means people just shift savings they would have done anyway into these tax-advantaged accounts rather than actually saving more. The government loses revenue, but total saving doesn't increase much.
What about health?
Health insurance deductions, especially in the U.S., are massive. Over $200 billion a year sometimes. They mostly subsidize employer-sponsored plans.
Which, again, might benefit higher earners more.
Often, yes, as they're more likely to have those kinds of jobs and benefits. But some tax expenditures are very effective. Family benefits, like child tax credits, especially if they're refundable, meaning even low-income families who don't owe income tax still get the cash, can be powerful tools against poverty. We saw that with the expanded U.S. child tax credit during the pandemic.
So the big implication here for how government works is that tax administrators need the tools and the mandate to measure and evaluate these tax expenditures just as rigorously as direct spending programs. Otherwise, you have this huge chunk of government activity happening without real oversight or accountability.
Okay, if these hidden expenditures are so big and hard to track, it sounds like just measuring total social spending must be incredibly difficult. What you see isn't always what you get.
That's exactly right. The measurement challenges are significant, and they really muddy the waters when we try to compare countries or evaluate policies. One big issue is functional versus administrative classification.
Yeah.
Government budgets are usually set up by Department Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, etc.
But social spending happens across many departments. Education spending might be in multiple places. It makes it really hard to add it all up accurately. This contributes to those bureaucratic silos we talked about. No one has the complete picture.
So you can't easily see the total spent on, say, supporting families because it's scattered everywhere.
Precisely. Then there's gross versus net expenditure. This is a bit technical, but important. Imagine country A gives a $100 benefit and taxes it back at 20%. Country B gives an $80 benefit, tax-free. The recipient gets $80 net in both cases, right?
Yeah.
But country A looks like it's spending $100, while country B is spending $80. It creates a measurement bias just based on how benefits are taxed.
Yeah, comparison's misleading.
Very misleading.
Yeah.
And quantifying those tax expenditures we keep talking about, it's really hard. Different methods, revenue forgone versus outlay equivalent, can give estimates that differ by 50% or more. That massively impacts policy transparency.
Wow. So what's the real bottom line? How much are we potentially undercounting?
When researchers make all the adjustments, include tax expenditures, account for spending by regional or local governments, which isn't always in the national totals, adjust for the gross net issue, they often find that true social spending is maybe 5–8% of GDP higher than the official headline numbers.
5 to 8% of GDP.
It's like finding whole extra government departments operating under the radar.
Why does this measurement gap matter so much for you, the listener?
Because if we don't measure it right, we can't evaluate it right. We make bad policy decisions based on flawed data. We get a completely skewed picture of what the government is actually doing or not doing in terms of social support.
Okay, let's try to tie some of these threads together with a few specific examples. France, the USA, India, they seem like really different approaches.
They really are, and they highlight the different models well. France fits that conservative welfare regime mold. Very high spending, 31.6% of GDP. A lot of it is financed through payroll taxes, social contributions. That creates quite a big tax wedge, as we mentioned, the gap between what it costs to employ someone and what they take home.
But the benefits are generous.
Very generous, focused on maintaining income levels. But some argue the high labor costs might discourage some job creation. It's a trade-off.
Then the U.S., our tax expenditure heavy example.
Exactly. The U.S. embodies the liberal welfare regime. The public spending number, 19.3% of GDP, looks relatively modest compared to France. But crucially, when you add in all those tax expenditures for health, retirement, housing, the total government social effort gets much closer to European levels. It's just delivered differently, hidden in the tax code.
Less visible, perhaps.
Definitely less visible. And then you have India, a fascinating case as a developing economy. Reported spending is low, around 7% of GDP, partly fiscal constraints, partly the large informal sector, which is hard to reach with traditional social insurance. But India is doing something really interesting. It's leapfrogging.
Leapfrogging.
Using digital technology like the Aadhaar identification system to overcome traditional administrative hurdles. They're using it for targeted subsidies, direct benefit transfers, reaching people much more efficiently than old paper-based systems could.
So adapting to their specific context.
Absolutely. And the big lesson from comparing these three, each model creates totally different challenges for tax administration, and it distributes the costs and benefits of social policy very differently across society, employers, workers, taxpayers.
Wow. We have covered a lot of ground today. It really has been a deep dive. We started by just defining social spending, then uncovered that whole hidden welfare state in tax expenditures. We traced the history, looked at different models around the world,
Dove into the specifics of healthcare, challenged some of those myths about economic growth.
and even got into the weeds of how it's paid for and why it's so darn hard to measure accurately.
And I think if you pull all those pieces together, the core message becomes pretty clear, doesn't it? Social sector expenditure, it's not just some boring line item in a government budget. It's fundamental. It's a structural part of modern economies, deeply, deeply connected to our tax systems.
It's a reflection of that social contract.
Exactly. And maybe most surprisingly for some, it's also a powerful engine for stability and even for growth. Not just a cost, but an investment.
So let's leave everyone with this thought. If social spending does boost stability and growth, and if a huge chunk of it is hidden in these tax expenditures, what does that change about how you think about the government's role in your own life? And maybe more importantly, what conversations should we really be having about our tax systems? How do we make them fairer, more transparent, and better aligned with the reality of social spending today?
Those are definitely the big questions to ponder.
Join us next time for another deep dive, bringing you the insights you need to be truly well informed.